I've been debating if I wanted to post this story because it was really unnerving. However, with all this quarantine going on, I figured that I might as well share this story in order to kill some time. For the past 2 years, I've been working at a haunted house attraction. It's a really fun gig, but the job tends to attract some rather creepy individuals. For the 2 years that I've worked there has always been some kind of creep that works there. I have another post that recounts the first year's scary incident. It's still up there if you want to check it out. This post in particular will recount my second year's creepy incident. I'll start this story with orientation day. This is where we meet all the other fellow actors and choose our roles. When I had walked into the building, my heart fell to the pit of my stomach. A man who looked like the same creeper from my first year at the haunted house was waiting for orientation to start. But I knew that it couldn't possibly be the same man, because the man from my first year had ended himself months ago. And to make matters even stranger, this man even had the same name, Daniel. So at first I thought this was all a wild coincidence. There's no way this man will also turn out to be a creep. Boy, was I wrong. Allow me to describe Daniel. He was a man probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He was a short and pudgy man. From the beginning, everyone could kind of tell that he was a little socially awkward, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he really did kind of creep out most of the workers. Additionally, he couldn't drive, so he was either super early to work or super late, and he was usually the last to leave. So overall, he was a peculiar fellow. But hey, we're all working at a peculiar job. Orientation came and went and without any issues, and soon the attraction had started. To understand the story, let me explain where I was located in the attraction. I was located in a large maze outside of the main house with about 5 other guys, including Daniel. These 5 guys were scattered throughout the maze, and I was at the center of it in a large rectangular room. The room was enclosed, unlike the rest of the maze, and had 2 exits. All of the guys besides Daniel were around my age, which was 18. Honestly, I don't even know whose brilliant idea it was to put a lone girl in a large maze with 5 guys. Thankfully, I was somewhat friends with one of the guys, so I didn't feel too alone. However, this friend was located at the tail end of the maze. Daniel was located decently close to my room, but that didn't bother me at first. There was no reason for Daniel or any of the other guys to enter my room. They all had their own positions to handle. One other thing to understand about this maze is that all of the actors were still able to see one another, because the walls in the maze were relatively short. So despite being far away from my friend, I was still able to see him. Now I hope that I explained that clearly. Nothing strange occurred the first 2 nights, but on the 3rd night, Daniel made his move. When no customers were going through the attraction, the actors would just walk around the maze or sit on the ground to relax. During these times, I would leave my room and either sit on the ground somewhere or enter the main house to grab a bottle of water. In order to enter the main house, I would have to go through the maze and pass Daniel's area. The first few times that I did this, Daniel said nothing and would just watch me. On the 3rd day, he finally mustered up the courage to say, "Hey, how are you?" Not thinking anything of it, I happily replied and carried on to fetch a water bottle. From then on, anytime I passed him, he always had some comment. It was harmless things at first, like, "You're really good. The weather's nice out here. You're a pretty scary actor." So other than him always having something to say, I really didn't think too much of it. Days continued on and Daniel kept getting a little braver. In between breaks, he would awkwardly walk towards the center of the maze. He moved really slowly, like he was trying to be stealthy. My only saving grace was that before he could reach my room, a group of customers would begin to approach and he would have to run back to his position. This is when alarm bells began to ring. I knew that there was no reason for Daniel to leave his position and come to mine. Now, whenever I saw that he was motioning towards my room, I would go out the other direction in hopes to put more distance between us. It didn't help that he was dressed in a scary costume and wearing a mask. This only added to the tension. On the times where I chose to sit on the ground and wait for customers, Daniel would go through the maze and stand where a single wall separated us. Looking back, I should have just walked away, but I didn't want to come off as a rude, punk-ass teenager. This is when he introduced himself, even though we already did that on orientation day. Trying to play nice, I introduced myself and we shook hands, and then he said the words that I will never forget. "You're beautiful." This caught me so off guard that all I could say was, "I'm sorry." He then repeated himself and kept his gaze locked on me. I very awkwardly replied, "Thanks," and refused to make eye contact with him. Keep in mind, I'm an 18-year-old girl and he's a man in his 40s. I'm also covered in sweat, mud, and fake blood. Thoroughly creeped out, I was now determined to avoid him at all costs. Whenever we had breaks, I now went through the maze in the opposite direction of Daniel in order to get to the main house. It was a longer way, but it was worth it. Daniel soon noticed this and now put more of an effort in walking towards my room between breaks. There were several times where he actually entered the room, but thankfully, I had the wits to leave the room entirely and go stand where my friend was. Daniel would just stand in my room, look around, and one time, he sat down on the floor. It was actually comical sometimes to see him standing in my room, realize that customers were coming, and then rush out of there and back into his position. Sadly, with how dark the maze was, I couldn't always keep a sharp eye on Daniel's whereabouts. There was one incident where he approached me unexpectedly and said, "I like the way you scream." One of my lines that I said in the attraction to customers was, "You can't leave me, I need you." And Daniel just absolutely ate that up and loved it. Well, you can bet after he said that he liked that line, I stopped using it. I had to endure a month of this, but over time, Daniel got the message that I was not interested. In retaliation, he began to steal my scare points. There were certain areas, scare points near my room, that I would pop out and scare customers. These scare points were accessible to the other actors, but no one else used them but me. I suppose Daniel was mad that I wasn't giving him any attention, so he decided to steal my scare points as revenge. He also began to copy some of my lines. Thankfully, towards the end of the haunt season, the managers of the attraction moved me inside the main house. I'm not sure why, because I didn't say anything to them about Daniel, even though I know I should have. So for the final days of working there, I was nowhere near Daniel. When the season ended, I was relieved. However, the managers had the bright idea to open a Christmas-themed haunted house, and they asked me to work it out. I loved the job and didn't plan on having a creep ruin it for me. Although many actors from the Halloween season didn't return for the Christmas attraction, Daniel was not one of them. He was there, and boy was he thrilled to see that I had returned as well. This time, however, I convinced my best friend to work there. So with my best friend being there, she sort of acted as a deterrent for Daniel. Throughout the whole season, he never approached me. Well, that was until the final night. My friend and I were chilling in one of the rooms and waiting on customers. This room was the first room in the attraction, so everyone else was passing through in order to get to their positions. Daniel began to pass through, and then suddenly turned back around to face my friend and me, again with those beady, never blinking eyes, and he said, "I think you two are beautiful." I just cringed and looked away as my friend shyly replied, "Thank you." So overall, Daniel is pretty creepy, but I suspect that maybe he doesn't know what he's doing is wrong. I don't think he really realizes that flirting with young girls and trying to be in a room alone with them is okay. I caught word that there might be something wrong with him, but I don't know for sure. But the feeling of dread I had in that maze is a feeling I will never forget. In retrospect, I really should have told someone. I kept telling myself that if Daniel did one more thing or tried to enter my room again, that I would tell the managers. One thing that I can think of that at least lightens the mood is that his costume was literally a tree man. His mask was just a tree with a contorted, scary face. When customers would walk by, they would all shout, "Look, it's Groot." It got a good laugh out of me every time. If I explain the story poorly, I'm sorry, and please ask anything if you're confused. So Daniel, maybe you're just looking for love, but you're looking in the wrong places, man. I'm assuming that I will see you again this coming season, and if I do, please stay away from me. This happened over a decade ago, but I only recently found this sub and I think it's a good fit. It was Halloween of 2008. I was in college and still in a relationship with my first serious boyfriend. We had been together since high school and it took this night to show me our relationship was abusive. It took one more incident before I finally left him for good. He was wonderful when sober, if intense and controlling, but when he was drunk, I learned that he was truly terrifying. This was the first such incident that truly scared me. He had joined in a stupid game, a Gatorade and Shine challenge. They would empty a bottle of Gatorade at least halfway, fill the rest up with moonshine. The goal was to finish the bottle within an hour and to have them tell crazy stories. When he completed the challenge, but he never did tell his friends the story. He couldn't remember most of it and it painted him in a horrific light. He knew things were heading downhill when he started calling me bad names, after saying hi to a guy friend at a party that we were at. I decided that we had better head home before he got any worse. I thought that I could nip it in the bud and manage it. We got home and changed out of our costumes. James wanted to have sex but in his state, and after what he had called me, I wasn't interested. Oddly enough, it led to him calling me more names. I left the apartment to go smoke. Our neighbors were having a party and two guys were outside smoking as well. They came over to see if I was okay. I had been crying and they had heard the yelling. I said I was, which they could obviously see was a lie. They let me know if I needed help, that they would help me. And James chose that moment to come outside. Said that he had heard us and told them to get away from me, stalking towards them. I stood up to get between them. They told me that they had meant what they said and to not forget it, and then told him to watch himself. I was facing them to say bye and thanks for the other when one of the guys gasped, staring at my boyfriend in shock. I turned around and my eyes immediately caught on the ground. Just as what I was seeing registered, the other guy lunged forward and grabbed me, pulling me behind him. What was on the ground that had elicited such reactions, you might ask? Blood. Blood was dripping on the ground from his hand. He was holding a knife so tightly that he had sliced his own hand open. I begged him to drop it, which he only agreed to when I walked back towards him. I was an idiot, I know. The two guys seemed at a loss and I feel so bad for them having their Halloween ruined by this scary, crazy stuff. They left me to it after I swore that I'd be fine, reiterating that I could come to them for help. We got inside and I immediately started hiding all the sharp objects, calling James' roommates begging that they come home. He started screaming at me to give him the knives back, how I was horrible and I wouldn't even have sex with him. What use was I? I called my parents and left, and then called his mom because I was scared that he would hurt himself. She let me know that he was my problem now. I should have called the police, but I didn't want to ruin his life. I know. I'm ashamed to say that I got back together with him for 6 more months of hell after that. But today I can safely say, James, please, let's not meet again. Ever again. This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time, I remember thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating, but who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured that we still had 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, My parents thought that it was fine for us to trick-or-treat together without adult supervision. Everything was going great and we were having fun, getting some salad candy, etc. And then we rang on one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on and there was a pumpkin or two, so we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first, I was glad because he was dressed in costume and happy to see my friend and me, so I felt that we were on for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed us, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter into his home, which is weird, but we were 13, so we didn't really think anything of it. And then he asked if he could take our photo. He said that he always liked to take photos of the kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random, unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kinda creeped out. I figured it was best not to upset the man, and let him take the picture and then we could leave. So, he snaps the photo of us and then he pulls out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it, with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says that he likes the kids whose pics he's taken to sign their names so he can know who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just run away, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, looked back up at me and then down at the paper, and then he repeated the fake name that I had given, and I nodded. Luckily after that, he didn't do anything and we were free to leave, but it definitely creeped us both out. At the time, I thought he was just an eccentric guy, but as an adult, looking back on the story, it seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to us, and hope nothing bad happened to any other kids. Halloween with all these costume kids trick-or-treating in the dark and minimal parental supervision could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes with no one knowing the kids' whereabouts. Please stay safe out there, and happy Halloween, everybody. It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are ages 7 and 9. Usually, I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So, I became a bit distracted and I stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes until suddenly, my kids came up to me and said that they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back at the man and his daughter were just standing there staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said that she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat. and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at the story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask had approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing is the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what had happened. We made sure to check through all of their candy but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the cops or anything, since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now.